When did you realize your home wasn't a safe place? My parents were each other's best friends, or so I thought. They'd finish each other's sentences, and sometimes it even felt like my dad loved my mom more than me. He was always telling other men how amazing she was and encouraging them to get to know her better. He never said that about me. Well, I was 10 years old playing Clash Royale at 3 a.m. when I heard it. My mom screamed at the top of her lungs, "Stop, stop, I can't take it anymore." I immediately ran upstairs, and when I opened the door, there was a man I didn't recognize standing up with a completely red face. He was doing his belt like he had just peed or something. Your mom and I were doing some yoga training. Sorry for waking you up." I glanced over at my mom, who had messy hair and tears in her eyes. And to 10-year-old me, it could only mean one thing. She had just been attacked. But right before I could kick him, the closet door opened and my dad jumped out. "Hey, buddy, relax," he exclaimed, grabbing my arms from behind. I just stared at him. "Dad, what the heck is going on?" The random man took the opportunity to run out, and my mom just held me while she cried. "Son, I'm so sorry." My dad grabbed my shoulder. "We wanted to wait to tell you, but you're 10, so you're ready to be a man. Your mother, she has cancer." All thoughts of trying to look cool jumped out the window. I uncrossed my arms and jumped into my mom's lap. "Mommy, I don't want you to die." My mom smiled softly and responded, "It's okay, honey. With this new treatment, the doctors say I have a 90% chance of living." My entire face scrunched into a smile and she continued, "There's going to be some strangers in the house from now on. They're just here to do their job. Try not to talk to them and they won't talk to you." The next morning I woke up and my parents handed me a badge to wear. It was an upside-down pineapple. "If any mommies or daddies in your class ask if we're looking for friends, tell them they can come over any time." I hugged them both super tight, thinking that I lived in the best house ever. And for the next few weeks, my parents did yoga classes with almost every parent in the school. It was always the same routine. They'd put me to bed, lock my door from the outside, and I would hear the bed frame thumping against the wall over and over while my mom screamed something about wanting more. We had to start buying toilet paper in bulk because mom's doctors used so much. Dad put a sign on the bathroom that said, "Please shower before treatment," with a smiley face. I thought doctors were just really clean people, until everything came crashing down. We were all sitting around the breakfast table one morning. My parents, my best friend's parents, and their friend, all wearing each other's clothes, when there was a knock at the door. I ran to open it and found a woman wearing a pink suit with a clipboard. "Are you here for my parents' yoga time?" I blurted out. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and did the teacher's pose where they bend down really far forward and put their hands between their legs. "Where are your parents?" I led her towards the kitchen, but when we walked in, they weren't there anymore. That's when I heard it. The sounds of my mom's cancer treatment. Thump, thump, thump. The woman's face drained of color. "Don't worry, that's just my mom's yoga class," I reassured her. She led me to the porch and gave me one of those chewy mints while she asked me questions. The woman, "Who's home when they have yoga classes?" Me, "Just the people here to help. Sometimes when there's a lot of people, they eat all the food and I have to try fill up on dry ramen. But it's okay because mommy will be better soon." The woman, "Have you ever seen anything confusing?" Me, "Mom's yoga teachers sometimes wear dog collars and crawl around. Dad says it's a special exercise for her spine." Her, "What happens after the treatments?" Me, "Everyone showers together to wash off the medicine. Sometimes my mom tells me to join in so we can save water." The woman, "Do you ever stay home from school?" Me, "Yes, but I only get to skip school on treatment days when I'm too tired from being up all night or when mom needs me to clean the house after her doctors arrive." By this point, the woman in the suit was holding my hand, whispering the words, "The system failed you." Meanwhile, I just sat there wondering if there'd be any good Pokemon to catch on Pokemon Go. After a few minutes of sitting in silence, everyone finally came down the stairs, and the woman in the suit stood at the front door. She stood there with her clipboard pressed against her chest, and her eyes moved between all the adults who were shuffling around looking for their shoes and bags. Cooper Bergman grabbed Lillian's hand, and they headed toward the back door without saying anything to anyone. Dad noticed them leaving, and his face got red, but he didn't try to stop them. The woman walked over to where my parents were standing near the couch and pulled out a business card from her jacket pocket. My dad put on this huge fake smile and stuck out his hand like they were meeting at a party or something. She didn't shake it. Instead, she held out the card between two fingers and waited for him to take it. Mom stood behind Dad with her arms crossed over her chest, and I could see she'd been crying because her mascara was smudged under her eyes. Dad started talking really fast about how this was all a big misunderstanding and that they ran an adult wellness group focused on alternative relationship structures and personal growth. He used words I'd never heard him say before, like privacy and consenting adults, and kept gesturing with his hands like he was giving a presentation at the school. Mom just nodded along with everything he said, but she looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I stood near the stairs feeling confused because everyone seemed so tense and scared when just an hour ago they were all laughing and having fun upstairs. The woman finally spoke and said her name was Celia Nixon and she worked for Child Protective Services. She said she'd be back in 48 hours for a full home assessment and that there were serious concerns about appropriate boundaries and child welfare in this household. Dad's fake smile disappeared completely and he started to argue, but Celia held up her hand and said, "This wasn't a discussion." She looked over at me one more time with those sad eyes and then walked out the front door without saying goodbye. As soon as she left, Dad slammed the door so hard that the picture frames on the wall shook. He turned around and stared at Mom like this was all her fault somehow. They didn't say anything for a long time, and I just stood there wondering if I should go back to my room or stay. Finally, Dad told me to sit down at the kitchen table because we needed to have a serious talk. I followed them into the kitchen and sat in my usual chair, while they sat across from me looking all serious and worried. Dad leaned forward with his elbows on the table and explained that some people don't understand their lifestyle choices. He said I needed to be very careful about answering questions from strangers, even official-looking ones with clipboards. He kept saying the word stranger over and over like Celia was some random person off the street instead of someone who worked for the government. Mom reached across the table and grabbed my hand and started crying again. She said she was so sorry I had to meet someone from the system and that everything would be fine as long as we all stuck together as a family. The way she said the system made it sound like some scary monster that was trying to hurt us. I felt this heavy weight in my stomach because I realized I might have gotten my parents in trouble by talking to Celia. They were just trying to help Mom with her cancer treatments, and I'd told this stranger lady everything about the yoga classes and the doctors and the showers. Dad kept talking about family loyalty and how important it was that we all told the same story if anyone asked more questions. He said their friends were just trying to help Mom get better and that the treatments were working really well. I wanted to believe him because he was my dad, and dads aren't supposed to lie to their kids. But something about the way Celia looked at me on the porch kept playing in my head. She seemed so sad and scared for me, and I didn't understand why if everything my parents were doing was normal and healthy like they said. That night I couldn't fall asleep even though I was super tired from being up late. I kept thinking about Celia's tears and the way she whispered about the system failing me. I thought about how my parents' friends always looked so weird after the yoga classes with their messy hair and red faces. I remembered how Dad locked my door from the outside every time they had treatments, and how I could hear Mom screaming through the walls. My stomach felt sick and uncomfortable like when you eat too much candy on Halloween. For the first time ever, a small voice in my head started asking if maybe the yoga classes weren't really yoga classes, if maybe the medical treatments weren't really medical treatments. But I pushed those thoughts away because thinking them felt like betraying my family, and Mom needed me to be strong while she fought her cancer. I finally fell asleep around 4 a.m. and had weird dreams about pineapples and clipboards. 2 days went by really slowly, and my parents were super nice to me the whole time. They let me stay up late playing video games and ordered pizza for dinner both nights. Dad kept asking me questions about what I told Celia and making sure I remembered the right way to explain things if she asked again. Then on the third day, there was another knock on the door right after I got home from the school. Celia was back, but this time she had another person with her, a man carrying a big camera. They spent 3 hours walking through every room in our house taking pictures of everything. They found the bulk toilet paper stacked in the hallway closet, and Celia wrote something on her clipboard. They saw the sign Dad made that said, "Please shower before treatment," with the smiley face. They opened the bathroom door and found the schedule taped there listing treatment times for different days of the week, with names next to each time slot. The other CPS worker took pictures of all of it, while my parents followed them around trying to explain everything. Dad kept saying the sign was just a joke between friends and that the schedule was for their book club. But Celia just kept writing notes and taking more pictures and asking questions about why a book club would need shower schedules and bulk toilet paper. After they finished taking pictures of everything, Celia sat down at our kitchen table and pulled out a thick folder of papers. She asked my parents to sit across from her, and I could tell Dad was really mad because his face was getting red and his hands were in fists. Celia explained something called a safety plan that would help make sure I was okay while living at home. The rules were pretty simple. No locked doors when I was home, no adult gatherings while I was awake, and someone from CPS would come check on us every 2 weeks. Dad's jaw got really tight, and he leaned forward in his chair. He started talking really loud about how this was their house, and they had rights to privacy, and that what consenting adults did in their own home was nobody's business. Mom just sat there nodding at everything Celia said and agreeing to all the rules without even looking at Dad. I could see Dad getting madder and madder as Mom kept saying yes to everything. Celia wrote down all the rules on official paper and slid it across the table for them to sign. Dad stared at the paper for a long time before he finally grabbed the pen and signed his name really hard, like he was trying to stab the paper. Mom signed right after him with shaky hands. Celia made copies of everything and gave one to my parents. Then she packed up her folders and told us she'd be back in 2 weeks to check on things. After she left, the house got super quiet and weird. Dad went straight to their bedroom and slammed the door. Mom started cleaning the kitchen even though it was already clean, scrubbing the counter over and over. I went to my room and played video games, but I could feel how different everything was now. For the next 2 days, Dad barely talked to Mom at all. He would wake up, eat breakfast without saying anything, go to work, come home, eat dinner in silence, and then go watch TV by himself. Mom tried to start conversations, but Dad would just grunt or ignore her completely. On the second night, I woke up around midnight because I heard them arguing in their bedroom. The walls in our house are pretty thin, so I could hear almost everything. Dad was saying this was all Mom's fault for being too loud during the yoga classes, and that if she had just been quieter, nobody would have noticed anything. Mom was crying and saying that Dad was the one who invited so many people over and that she never wanted things to get this big. Dad said something about how Mom was the one who agreed to everything, and now she was acting like she was forced into it. Mom said that's not fair because Dad always made her feel like she had to say yes or he would leave her. They went back and forth like this for what felt like forever. I put my pillow over my head and tried not to listen, but their voices kept getting louder and louder. Finally, around 2 a.m., it got quiet again, and I could hear Mom crying softly through the wall. I felt sick to my stomach and couldn't fall back asleep. The next week was really tense at home. My parents were following the safety plan rules, but you could tell they hated it. No more people coming over for yoga classes, no more locked doors. Everything felt wrong and uncomfortable. Then one afternoon, I got home from the school early because we had a half day. When I walked in the front door, I saw Dad standing outside my bedroom with his hand on the doorknob. He had that key he always used to lock my door from the outside, and he was about to put it in the lock. Right at that moment, there was a knock on the door. Dad jumped and shoved the key in his pocket really fast. When he opened the door, Celia was standing there with her clipboard. She said she was doing a surprise visit to make sure everything was going okay. Dad's face went completely white. Celia walked past him and went straight to my bedroom door, trying the handle. Then she looked at Dad and asked why he was standing outside my room. Dad stammered something about checking if I was home yet, but Celia just wrote something on her clipboard. She pulled out her phone and called someone, talking in a low voice while Dad stood there looking panicked. After she hung up, Celia told Dad that the safety plan was modified immediately. Now there would be unannounced visits at random times, and both my parents had to attend mandatory parenting classes every week. Dad's face turned red again and he started arguing, but Celia held up her hand. She said if he didn't agree to the new terms, there would be more serious interventions, and he probably wouldn't like what those were. Dad shut his mouth and nodded. A few days later at the school, my teacher, Miss Clark, asked me to stay inside during recess. She sat down next to me at one of the little tables and asked how things were going at home. Her voice was really nice and patient, like she actually cared about the answer. I felt nervous because I remembered what my parents told me to say if anyone asked questions. I repeated the words Dad made me practice, that my parents' choices were private, that everything they did was between consenting adults, and that I was perfectly safe and happy. But even as I said the words, my voice sounded weird and fake. Miss Clark just nodded and said I could always come talk to her if I needed anything. The next time Celia came for a visit, she pulled me aside while my parents were in the other room. She handed me a card with a cartoon superhero on it and her phone number written in big numbers. She told me I could call her any time, day or night, if I felt unsafe or confused about anything. Then she leaned in close and whispered that if my parents were listening when I called, I could use special code words. She said if I told her I was calling about homework, that meant I needed help but couldn't talk freely. If I said I was calling about a school project, that meant it was an emergency. I put the card in my pocket and nodded. After that, my parents started following all the safety plan rules, but the whole house felt different. The frequent gatherings stopped completely. Cooper and Lillian stopped coming over, and so did all the other parents who used to visit. My parents seemed angry all the time, even though they tried to hide it from me. Dad would get this look on his face like he was furious about something but holding it in. Mom just seemed sad and tired constantly. Their friends from the yoga classes stopped calling. I heard Dad on the phone one night telling someone that CPS had ruined everything and that they couldn't have people over anymore. One evening, Dad sat me down on the couch for what he called an important talk. He started using all these big words I didn't really understand. Polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, alternative relationship structures. He kept saying that their lifestyle was actually very mature and healthy, that lots of adults chose to have relationships this way, and that everything they did was between consenting adults who all agreed to participate. He talked for almost an hour about how society doesn't understand people who make different choices, and how their friends were just exploring consensual adult activities. But the whole time he was talking, I kept thinking about one thing he never explained. If everything was so mature and healthy like he said, why did they lie about Mom having cancer? Why did they tell me she was dying if this was all just normal adult stuff? I didn't ask the question out loud, but it sat in my brain getting bigger and bigger. 3 weeks after Celia's first visit, I came home from the school and found my parents sitting in the living room with Celia and another person I didn't recognize. The other person was a man in a suit carrying a briefcase, and he introduced himself as a court supervisor. They were all sitting around our coffee table with papers spread out everywhere. I could hear them talking about mandatory family therapy, continued monitoring for the next 6 months, and the possibility of more serious interventions if the safety plan wasn't followed perfectly. Dad sat there with his arms crossed, looking miserable. Mom was crying quietly and agreeing to everything they said. The court supervisor guy wrote down a bunch of notes and told my parents they had to attend their first family therapy session next Tuesday. After everyone left, the house got quiet again. That night I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when my bedroom door opened slowly. Mom came in and sat on the edge of my bed. She waited until she could hear Dad snoring in their bedroom, then she leaned close and started whispering. Her voice was shaky and scared. She told me she never had cancer. She said she was scared of being alone and that Dad convinced her the gatherings would bring them closer together as a couple. She said at first it was just one other couple, then it grew and grew until there were people over almost every night. She said now she doesn't know how to stop without losing Dad completely because this lifestyle is what he wants more than anything. I just stared at her in the dark. My brain felt like it was breaking into pieces. Everything I believed about the treatments and the doctors and the yoga classes was crashing down all at once. The strangers weren't helping Mom get better because Mom was never sick. The locked doors weren't to protect her during medical treatments. The screaming wasn't from cancer procedures. All of it was lies. Every single thing they told me was designed to keep me quiet and compliant while they did whatever they wanted. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, and I was falling through empty space with nothing to grab onto. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table pushing cereal around in my bowl without eating any of it. I couldn't make myself look at either of my parents even though I could feel Dad watching me from across the table. Mom kept her eyes down on her coffee cup, and nobody said anything for a long time. Dad finally cleared his throat and reached over to ruffle my hair like he always did when he wanted things to feel normal again. I pulled my head away fast, and his hand just hung there in the air for a second before he put it back down. I stared right at him and asked why they lied about Mom dying if everything they were doing was so healthy and mature like he kept saying. My voice came out louder than I meant it to, and Mom's coffee cup rattled against the table. Dad's face turned red, and he started talking in that voice he used when he thought I was being difficult. He said I was too young to understand complex adult relationships, and that when I got older, I would see that their choices were actually very progressive and enlightened. But I cut him off before he could get going on another long lecture. I told him that Celia said lying to kids about cancer is actually a form of emotional abuse. The kitchen went completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Mom started crying into her coffee, and Dad just sat there with his mouth open like he couldn't believe I had said that out loud. Nobody ate any more breakfast after that, and I went to my room and stayed there until Celia came by later that afternoon. She sat with my parents in the living room for over an hour, and I could hear their voices going up and down through my bedroom door. When she finally came upstairs to talk to me, she said she had arranged for me to start seeing a therapist who specialized in helping kids process confusing family situations. The therapist's name was Frances Crow, and I would have my first appointment next Tuesday after school. Celia wrote down the address on a piece of paper and told me that everything I said to Frances would be private unless I was in danger. She said Frances was really good at helping kids figure out their feelings when their home life got complicated. When Tuesday came, my mom drove me to Frances's office without talking much during the car ride. The office was in a small building near the library and had a waiting room with comfortable chairs and magazines spread out on a coffee table. Frances came out to get me after a few minutes, and she had a calm voice and warm smile that made me feel a little less nervous. Her office had big windows that let in lots of light, and there were toys and art supplies on shelves along one wall. She told me that everything I said in her office was confidential, which meant she wouldn't tell my parents unless I was in danger or said it was okay. Then she asked me to draw a map of my house and mark which rooms felt safe and which ones felt scary or confusing. I took a long time with the drawing because I wanted to get all the rooms in the right places. When it was done, I colored my bedroom green because that was the only place that felt safe anymore. Then I colored my parents' bedroom red and the upstairs bathroom red too. Frances looked at my drawing and nodded like this made perfect sense to her. She didn't act shocked or surprised, and she didn't try to tell me I was wrong about how I felt. She just asked me questions about why I chose those colors and listened really carefully to my answers. When the session was over, Frances walked me back out to the waiting room where Mom was sitting. But Dad was there too now, standing by the door with his arms crossed. As soon as Mom and I started walking toward the exit, Dad stepped in front of Frances and started talking loud enough that everyone in the waiting room could hear. He said she was turning me against my parents and planting ideas in my head that weren't there before. His voice got louder with each word, and Frances just stood there looking at him calmly. She said in a quiet voice that she was helping me process experiences I already had, not creating new ones. Dad's face turned even redder, and he opened his mouth to say something else, but Frances held up her hand and told him that if he continued to harass her in her workplace, she would have to call security. Mom grabbed Dad's arm and pulled him toward the door, and I followed them out to the parking lot. The car ride home was tense and silent, and I could see Dad's hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. That evening, I was lying on my bed trying to do homework when I heard my parents start arguing downstairs. Their voices got louder and louder until I could hear every word through my bedroom door, even though I put my pillow over my head. Mom was saying she wanted to stop the gatherings completely and focus on fixing things with me. Dad's voice came back angry, saying that she was letting CPS destroy their life and giving up on everything they had built together. He said she was being weak, and that if she really loved him, she would stand up to the system instead of caving to their demands. Mom started crying and saying that she loved me more than any lifestyle choice, and that she couldn't keep living like this knowing how much damage they had done. The argument went on for over an hour, and I heard things crash and doors slam before it finally got quiet again. The next week, Celia came by the house for one of her check-in visits and asked if she could talk to me alone on the porch. We sat on the steps, and she had a serious look on her face that made my stomach feel tight. She said she needed to explain something to me about the upside-down pineapple symbol my parents had given me. She used words that were simple enough for me to understand, but she didn't try to make it sound nicer than it was. She told me that in some adult communities, the pineapple was a signal that people were interested in a specific kind of relationship arrangement. As she explained it more, all the weird looks and whispered conversations from other parents at the school suddenly made horrible sense. I felt my face get hot and my hands started shaking because I realized I had been wearing that badge every single day, telling everyone at the school that my parents were looking for those kinds of friends. The next day at the school, I ripped the pineapple badge off my shirt during lunch and threw it in the trash can by the cafeteria doors. Harold was walking past and saw me do it, and he stopped to ask why I was throwing it away. I told him his parents were weird, and that he should ask them what they did at our house on all those nights they came over. Harold's face got confused, and he said his parents told him they were just playing board games with my parents. I said that wasn't what they were really doing, and that he should ask them about it when he got home. Harold walked away looking worried, and I felt bad for saying it, but also relieved that I didn't have to keep pretending everything was normal anymore. That afternoon, when my mom picked me up from the school, several of the other parents who used to smile and wave at us just turned away and walked to their cars fast. Mom noticed it too, and her hands gripped the steering wheel the same way Dad's had after the therapy appointment. When we got home, Dad was waiting in the driveway and he was furious. He said Cooper and Lillian had called to say they were cutting off all contact with our family and that several other parents from the gatherings were avoiding them at the school pickup. He looked right at me and said I had ruined their social circle and destroyed friendships that took years to build. Mom tried to defend me, but Dad just went inside and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. 3 weeks later, we all had to go to a court hearing downtown in a big building with marble floors and metal detectors at the entrance. Judge Kingsley Hampton sat behind a huge wooden desk and looked through papers while a court supervisor talked about our case. The judge ordered continued services, including family therapy sessions twice a month, individual therapy for both my parents, and monthly monitoring visits from CPS. He said these requirements would stay in place for at least 6 months and possibly longer depending on how things went. Dad sat through the whole hearing with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched tight, not looking at anyone. Mom cried quietly and kept nodding and promising to do better whenever the judge asked her questions. When it was finally over, we walked out of the courthouse and got in the car, and nobody said anything the whole drive home. The next week, Frances had me sit on the floor of her office with a big box of toys spread out between us. She pulled out some dolls and action figures and told me to make up any story I wanted using them. I grabbed a kid doll and some adult dolls and started setting up a scene where the kid locked all the adults outside a house. Then I had the kid doll go to the kitchen and eat a huge meal without anyone bothering him, and after that the kid went to sleep in his bed for the whole night without any noise waking him up. Frances wrote notes on her clipboard the entire time and asked me why the kid needed to lock everyone out. I told her because then he could finally feel safe and have enough food and sleep without weird stuff happening, and she nodded like that made perfect sense. When Mom picked me up from therapy that day, she asked what we talked about, but I just shrugged and said we played with toys. At home that evening, Mom and Dad got into another argument about the family therapy sessions, and I heard Mom say the word inappropriate for the first time when talking about the gatherings. Dad's voice got really loud, and he said she was letting the system brainwash her into thinking normal adult fun was somehow wrong. Mom didn't back down, though, and she kept repeating that having those activities while I was in the house was inappropriate, no matter how they tried to justify it. Dad slammed the bedroom door and didn't come out for the rest of the night, while Mom sat on the couch looking tired but also kind of stronger than before. The court ordered Dad to take parenting classes every week, and he started going but complained about it constantly. He'd come home from each class and rant about how the instructor didn't understand alternative lifestyles and kept pushing traditional family values on everyone. Dad insisted over and over that the only real problem was getting caught by CPS, not what they were actually doing at the gatherings. He said if we'd just been more careful about timing and keeping me away from the activities, then none of this would have happened. Mom tried to argue with him about it, but he just talked over her and said she was turning into one of those judgmental people who couldn't handle adults making their own choices. One afternoon, I was in my room playing on my phone when I heard Dad talking on his in the hallway. He was telling someone that they should have the next gathering at their house instead of ours, since we had too much CPS attention right now. My stomach dropped, and I immediately grabbed the card Celia gave me and called her number with shaking hands. She answered on the second ring, and I whispered that Dad was planning to go to a gathering at someone else's place. Celia said she'd be there soon and told me to stay in my room until she arrived. Less than an hour later, the doorbell rang, and I heard Celia's voice at the front door asking to speak with my parents. Dad's face went completely pale when he walked into the living room and saw her standing there, and he realized right away that I must have called her. Celia asked him directly about the phone conversation, and Dad stammered something about just talking to an old friend, but she wasn't buying it. She made some calls right there in our living room and then told my parents the safety plan was changed immediately. The new rules said Dad couldn't have any contact with anyone who went to the gatherings, and he had to move out of the house temporarily while Mom and I stayed. Dad went upstairs to pack a bag, and the whole time he kept glaring at me like everything was my fault. Mom just sat on the couch staring at the wall, not saying anything or doing anything, like she'd completely checked out of the situation. When Dad came back down with his suitcase, he walked right past me without saying goodbye and slammed the front door so hard the pictures on the wall shook. After Dad left, the house felt completely different, like someone had opened all the windows and let fresh air in. Mom and I ate dinner together at the kitchen table without the heavy feeling of secrets sitting between us. She asked me questions about school and actually listened to my answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. We watched a movie together that night, and Mom laughed at the funny parts, which I hadn't heard her do in forever. At my next therapy session, Frances helped me understand that I could love my parents and still be really angry about what they did to me. She explained that adults sometimes make terrible choices that hurt kids, even when they convince themselves everything is fine. Frances said my feelings of being betrayed and confused were completely normal, and that I didn't have to pretend to be okay just to make my parents feel better. She told me it was possible to want my family to get better, while also being mad that they messed up so badly in the first place. 3 months went by with Dad living in his apartment, and only seeing us at scheduled times. Then Dad asked if he could have supervised visits with me at a park near our house. A CPS supervisor came with us and sat on a bench nearby, while Dad and I threw a frisbee back and forth. Dad kept trying to act normal and fun like nothing had changed between us, but everything felt weird and forced. He asked me about school and video games and tried to make jokes, but I could barely look at him without remembering all the lies. The supervisor checked her watch a lot and took notes on a clipboard, which made Dad even more nervous and fake. During our third visit, Dad finally said he was sorry for lying about Mom having cancer. He admitted that locking my bedroom door from the outside was wrong and that he should have protected me better. Then he tried to defend the gatherings themselves by saying they were just adult fun and nobody got hurt, but at least he said that involving me even a little bit was a mistake. It felt like a tiny step forward, even though he still didn't really get why the whole thing was so messed up. Mom kept going to her therapy sessions and started acting different around Dad during the supervised exchanges when he'd drop me off. She told him she was completely done with the lifestyle and needed time to figure out who she was without it. Dad got really upset and accused her of abandoning him and everything they built together. Mom stayed calm, though, and said she needed to focus on being a better parent, and that meant making choices he might not like. I stood outside their bedroom door listening to every word, and something inside me felt different, like maybe Mom was actually starting to get it. A few weeks later, I turned 11, and Frances handed me a small leather journal during our session. She told me I could write down anything I wanted, and nobody would ever read it unless I chose to share it, which made it feel like a safe place to put all the stuff bouncing around in my head. That night, I opened the journal and started writing, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I filled pages with how angry I was about the cancer lie, how I kept wondering what parts of my childhood were real and what parts were just another trick to keep me quiet. I wrote about missing the version of my parents I thought I had, the ones who were just helping sick people instead of doing whatever they were actually doing. The words poured out faster than I could think them, and my hand cramped up, but I kept going because it felt like finally getting to say all the things I wasn't allowed to say out loud. 3 weeks later, Mom got a call from the courthouse and we had to go back for another hearing with Judge Hampton. We sat in the same waiting room as before, and Dad showed up separately, which felt weird but also kind of better. The judge reviewed all the reports from Frances and the parenting classes and the supervised visits, then announced that Dad could move back home under strict conditions. He listed them out one by one while a court recorder typed everything. No gatherings ever, continued therapy for everyone, immediate consequences if any boundaries got violated, and monthly check-ins for the next 6 months. Dad nodded and agreed to everything, but I watched his face and could tell he was just saying what the judge wanted to hear. His jaw was tight, and his eyes kept darting around like he was already planning how to work around the rules. When we got home that afternoon, Dad brought his suitcase back from the apartment and unpacked his stuff into the guest room since Mom still wasn't ready for him to sleep in their old bedroom. The first week with Dad back was the most uncomfortable thing ever. He kept trying way too hard to be the fun dad, asking if I wanted to play video games or offering to buy me new shoes or take me out for ice cream. I mostly stayed in my room with the door closed or went over to Harold's house where things felt normal and nobody was trying to prove anything. At night, I could hear Dad pacing around downstairs, and sometimes I heard him and Mom having quiet arguments that stopped the second they thought I might be listening. During my next session with Frances, she taught me some new coping strategies for when I felt anxious or triggered by stuff at home. She showed me how to do deep breathing, where you count to 4 breathing in and count to 6 breathing out, and grounding techniques where you name 5 things you can see and 4 things you can touch and 3 things you can hear. She also gave me a safe phrase to use with Mom when I needed space, which was just me saying I needed to go read in my room, and Mom would know that meant I was feeling overwhelmed and needed to be left alone. These tools made me feel less powerless when uncomfortable feelings came up, because at least I had something I could do instead of just sitting there feeling bad. At the school, Mr. Clark coordinated with Frances and Celia to make sure I had support during the day, too. She told me I could take breaks in the counselor's office whenever I needed to, and she wouldn't push me to explain why, which made school feel like a safe space where nobody was demanding anything from me. Sometimes I'd just go sit in the quiet room and do my breathing exercises or write in my journal, and Mrs. Clark would check on me, but mostly just let me have the space to calm down. 6 months after Celia first knocked on our door wearing that pink suit, my parents' relationship was clearly falling apart. They slept in separate bedrooms and barely talked except about boring stuff like who was picking me up from the school or what we needed from the grocery store. Mom started making comments during therapy sessions about maybe separating permanently once the court case officially closed, and Dad's face would go red, but he wouldn't say anything until we got home. One night I heard them arguing in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep. Dad was trying to convince Mom to give the lifestyle one more chance with better boundaries this time, saying they could be more careful and keep me completely separate from everything. I crept to the top of the stairs and heard Mom firmly tell him no. Her voice was steady and clear when she said she was finally realizing how much she lost herself trying to keep him happy, and that she needed to focus on being a better mother instead of worrying about his needs all the time. Dad slammed a cabinet and walked out to the garage, and I hurried back to my room before Mom could catch me listening. The next week, I had a breakthrough session with Frances where everything I'd been holding in finally came pouring out. She asked me how I was feeling about my parents, and instead of giving my usual answer about being fine or whatever, I just started crying. Not the quiet kind of crying, but the ugly sobbing kind where you can't breathe right and your whole face gets splotchy. Frances just sat there holding space for me, not trying to make it better or telling me to calm down, just letting me cry about everything. I cried about losing the parents I thought I had, the ones who were good people helping sick folks instead of lying manipulators. I cried about all the nights I spent locked in my room thinking Mom was dying. I cried about the innocent version of me who wore that stupid pineapple badge and thought I lived in the best house ever. Frances validated that it was okay to mourn the childhood I thought I had, the one that got taken away when I found out the truth. She said grief wasn't just for when people die, but also for when you lose the version of your life you believed in. After a full year of monitoring and check-ins and surprise visits, the CPS case officially closed. Judge Hampton reviewed everything one last time and noted significant progress and sustained safety in his final report. Celia came over for a last visit and sat with me on the front porch where we first talked. She told me I was brave for speaking up that day, even though I didn't know I was speaking up, and that she was proud of how much work I'd done in therapy. I asked her if she thought my parents would go back to the old stuff once the case was closed, and she said honestly she didn't know, but that I now had tools and people who would listen if things got bad again. Even though the case was officially done, my parents kept going to therapy and mostly maintained the boundaries that got established. Dad still seemed resentful sometimes, and I'd catch him giving Mom these looks like she'd betrayed him, but he followed the rules. Mom had become genuinely different, though, more present when we talked and more honest about stuff. She actually asked me real questions about my day and listened to my answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. She started doing things just with me, like taking me to the library or going for walks around the neighborhood, and during those times she felt like an actual mom instead of someone playing the role of a mom. Dad tried to do the same kind of bonding stuff, but it always felt forced and awkward, like he was checking boxes on a list rather than actually wanting to spend time with me. Middle school started 2 months later, and I made a decision on the first day not to tell anyone about what happened at home. Harold knew some of it because his parents were involved, but we had this unspoken agreement not to discuss it, and I appreciated having a friend who just let me be normal without questions. We'd sit together at lunch talking about video games and stupid YouTube videos, and he never once brought up the CPS stuff or asked why his parents stopped coming over. The other kids at the school had no idea about any of it, and I wanted to keep it that way because being the kid whose parents got investigated sounded like social suicide. I kept my head down, did my homework, played Clash Royale during breaks, and tried to blend in with everyone else who had normal, boring families. Frances and I shifted our therapy focus around the same time, from crisis management to building resilience and healthy relationship skills. She started teaching me about boundaries and consent, and how to recognize when adults were being inappropriate, which felt like she was giving me armor against future manipulation. We'd do these role-play exercises where she'd pretend to be an adult, asking me uncomfortable questions, and I had to practice saying no or walking away. At first, it felt stupid and awkward, but after a few sessions, I started understanding why it mattered. She taught me that my body belonged to me, and nobody had the right to make me uncomfortable even if they were family or authority figures. She explained the difference between secrets that keep you safe and secrets that make you feel weird or scared. We practiced identifying red flags in adult behavior, like when someone tries to isolate you from other people or tells you not to tell your parents about something. Frances said these skills would protect me for the rest of my life, and I believed her because she'd been right about everything else so far. On my 13th birthday, Mom gave me a card with a genuine apology written inside, instead of just signing her name like usual. She acknowledged specific ways she failed me, including lying about the cancer and exposing me to inappropriate situations and not protecting me when I needed her most. She took responsibility without making excuses or blaming Dad or saying she didn't know better. The card said she was sorry for prioritizing her relationship with Dad over my safety and well-being. She promised to keep doing the work to be the parent I deserved and said she understood if I needed time to trust her again. She wrote that loving me meant accepting I might be angry for a long time, and that was okay because she earned that anger. Reading it made me cry in a way that felt different from the sad crying I'd done before. This felt more like relief that she finally got it and wasn't trying to minimize what happened anymore. The apology meant more than any present could because it showed she was actually listening to Frances and taking therapy seriously instead of just going through the motions to satisfy the court. Dad's apology came later and felt less complete, but at least he tried. He sat me down one weekend and admitted that his need for excitement and validation mattered more to him than my well-being for a long time. He said he convinced himself the gatherings were fine as long as I didn't fully understand what was happening, but now he realized how messed up that logic was. He told me he was trying to change, but knew it would take years to rebuild my trust, which was at least honest. Unlike Mom's written apology, Dad's felt more like he was reading from a script his therapist gave him. The words were right, but something about his delivery made it seem like he was apologizing because he had to not, because he fully understood why. He kept adding little justifications like how other kids in the lifestyle community turned out fine, or how he thought locking my door was protecting me. I accepted his apology because what else was I supposed to do, but I didn't feel the same relief I felt with Mom's card. A few months after my birthday, I discovered the upside-down pineapple symbol in a store display at the mall and had a full panic attack right there in the middle of the home goods section. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe right, and everything around me started spinning like I was going to pass out. Mom was with me shopping for new school clothes, and she found me sitting on the floor hyperventilating with my head between my knees. She stayed calm and used the grounding techniques Frances taught us, telling me to name 5 things I could see and 4 things I could touch. She didn't freak out or make it worse by panicking herself. She just sat down on the floor next to me and breathed slowly until I could match her rhythm. After a few minutes, my chest loosened up and I could think clearly again. We left the store without buying anything and sat in the car for a while before driving home. Mom didn't ask a million questions or make me explain what triggered it because she already knew. She just held my hand and said it was okay and that we could try shopping another day. The next therapy session, Frances explained that triggers might pop up unexpectedly for years, and that was normal for anyone who experienced what I did. She reminded me that having a reaction didn't mean I was broken or weak, just that my brain was protecting me from potential danger based on past experience. She said the pineapple symbol got connected in my mind to all the bad stuff that happened, so seeing it activated my fight or flight response automatically. Frances taught me more coping strategies for when triggers came up, including breathing exercises and ways to ground myself in the present moment. She said over time the triggers would probably get less intense as my brain learned I was safe now, but they might never go away completely. That scared me a little, thinking I'd have to deal with random panic attacks forever, but Frances said knowing about triggers and having tools to manage them was better than being blindsided. She was right, because the next time I saw a pineapple decoration, I felt anxious but didn't completely lose it. My parents officially separated when I was 14, with Dad moving into an apartment across town. The divorce was relatively amicable because they were both exhausted from years of tension, and honestly, the separation made visits with Dad less stressful because Mom wasn't around to remind him of everything that went wrong. They sat me down together to tell me, and I mostly felt relieved instead of sad like you're supposed to feel when your parents split up. Dad packed his stuff over a weekend, and Mom helped him load boxes into his truck without fighting, which seemed weird, but also kind of nice. They worked out a custody schedule where I'd spend every other weekend with Dad, plus one dinner during the week. The house felt quieter after he left, but in a good way, like we could finally relax without walking on eggshells. Mom seemed lighter too, like a weight had been lifted, and she could breathe properly for the first time in years. I started spending weekends with Dad at his apartment, and slowly we built a different kind of relationship that felt more honest and less performative. His place was small with just 2 bedrooms and basic furniture, but it was clean and felt more normal than our house ever did. He was dating someone new in a traditional monogamous relationship and seemed genuinely happier without the pressure of maintaining the lifestyle he thought he wanted. Her name was never mentioned around me per the custody agreement, but I could tell from the way he talked about his week that he had someone making him smile. We'd order pizza and play video games or go see movies, and he stopped trying so hard to be the cool, fun dad. He asked real questions about school and actually listened to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. Sometimes we'd sit in comfortable silence, which never happened before because Dad always needed to fill every quiet moment. It wasn't perfect, and I still felt guarded around him, but it was better than the forced bonding attempts from before. Mom started taking college classes at the community college and discovered she loved learning about psychology and social work. She'd come home from class excited to tell me about what she learned and how it connected to our experiences. She said maybe she could use what she learned from her mistakes to help other families avoid similar situations, which seemed like a healthy way to process everything. She studied late into the night sometimes, and I'd find her at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and notes. Her grades were really good because she actually cared about the material, unlike when she was younger, and just went through the motions. She talked about maybe becoming a family therapist or working for an organization that helped parents in crisis. Watching her work towards something meaningful made me respect her more than I had in years. She was finally figuring out who she was outside of being Dad's wife or my mom. Francis and I agreed to reduce therapy to monthly check-ins since I was doing so much better overall. I'd built real friendships at the school beyond just Harold, and my grades were good, and I had healthy coping strategies for when difficult feelings came up. Francis said she was proud of how much work I'd done, and that I should be proud too. We still met once a month to touch base and make sure I wasn't sliding backward, but the sessions felt more like conversations with a trusted adult than intensive therapy. She reminded me I could always come back to weekly sessions if things got hard again, and that needing help wasn't a sign of failure. The progress felt real and earned, not like someone just telling me I was fine when I wasn't. I could handle triggers better, set boundaries with both parents, and actually enjoy being a teenager instead of constantly processing trauma. When I turned 15, Francis gave me a therapy assignment to write a letter to my 10-year-old self. I sat at my desk staring at blank paper for 20 minutes before I finally started writing. The words came out messy and honest. I told that scared kid that none of it was his fault, that talking to Celia was the bravest thing he could have done, and that life gets better even though the path forward is hard and confusing. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer where I could find it on bad days. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out my closet and found a box of old stuff from elementary school. There at the bottom, under some Pokemon cards and broken toys, was the pineapple badge. I picked it up and held it for a long time, remembering how excited I felt when my parents first gave it to me. I remembered thinking I lived in the best house ever, and that my parents were the coolest people in the world. Then I walked downstairs and threw it in the kitchen trash without saying anything to Mom. She saw me do it and just nodded, and that was enough. High school brought new challenges, but I discovered something unexpected. Other kids started coming to me when they had problems at home. A girl in my English class whose parents were getting divorced asked me how I dealt with my parents splitting up. A guy on the soccer team whose dad had addiction issues wanted to know how I handled having a parent who made bad choices. I became the person friends trusted when they needed someone who understood that families can be really complicated and that it's okay to have mixed feelings about the people who raised you. I never told them the specific details of what happened in my house, but somehow they knew I got it. During my junior year, Mom walked across the stage at the community college and received her associate degree. I sat in the audience clapping as loud as I could while she smiled bigger than I'd seen in years. She got a job at a nonprofit as a family support specialist, working with parents who were involved with CPS. She helped them understand the system and make better choices for their kids. She was genuinely good at it because she understood their perspective in a way other workers couldn't. Watching her help other families avoid the mistakes she made felt like proof that people really can change if they do the actual work. Dad joined a men's group focused on healthy relationships and taking responsibility for your actions. I didn't hear much about it until one afternoon when he called me. His voice sounded different, quieter and less defensive than usual. He said the group helped him understand how his choices impacted me in ways he was too busy justifying to see before. His voice cracked when he thanked me for not giving up on him completely, even when I had every reason to. I didn't know what to say, so I just told him I appreciated him telling me that. It wasn't a magic moment that fixed everything, but it mattered. When I turned 18, Francis suggested we do a final review of my progress since that first session, when I colored the house map with red and green crayons. We looked through old journal entries and worksheets, tracking how far I'd come in understanding boundaries and processing what happened. We talked about how I built a life that feels safe and real, instead of performative and confusing. Sitting in her office looking at all that evidence of growth, I realized I was actually proud of myself. The work was hard and messy, and sometimes I wanted to quit, but I didn't. My high school graduation arrived on a sunny Saturday in June. Mom sat in Section B with her boyfriend, and Dad sat in Section F with his girlfriend. They were both genuinely happy for me in their own ways. After the ceremony, Mom brought me flowers, and Dad brought a card with $200 inside. I hugged them both because I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It just means choosing not to let the past control every single decision you make going forward. They would never be the parents I thought I had when I was 10, but they were trying to be better versions of themselves now. That summer, I filled out college applications and wrote my essay about wanting to study social work. Frances and Celia, and even Mom's journey toward fixing her mistakes, all inspired me. I wanted to be the person who shows up for kids living in confusing situations and helps them understand they deserve safety and honesty. I wanted to be someone's Frances, someone's Celia. A week before leaving for college, I met Celia for coffee at a place near campus. She looked the same as she did that day in the pink suit, except with a few more gray hairs. She told me she thinks about my case often, especially on hard days when she questions whether her job makes any difference. She said seeing me thriving and heading off to study social work makes all the difficult parts of her work feel worthwhile. I thanked her for being the person who showed up that morning and asked the right questions that finally let the truth come out. She smiled and said I was the brave one, not her. I told her we could both be brave. She paid for my coffee and gave me her new business card for when I started my internship hours. As I walked back to my car, I thought about that 10-year-old kid playing Clash Royale at 3 a.m. He had no idea what was coming, no idea how much his life would change. But he survived it and became someone stronger, someone who could help other kids survive their own confusing situations. That felt like enough. And that's the takeaway from this one. I try to make sure each story gives you something you can carry into your own life. If it sparked even one good idea, that makes it worth it. Subscribe so you can catch the next one.